Hello and welcome back to the State of the QUnion live stream here on Q30 Television. I'm joined now by Monique Drucker, the Vice President and Dean of Students, and Sal Filardi, the Vice President for Facilities and Capital Planning. Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
So initial thoughts after the event will go one by one. Monique, what do you think your initial thoughts are following the State of the QUnion and any new things you learned based on questions asked?
Sure. I thought it was a good event. I think it's always great as an opportunity as an administrator to hear what the students' concerns are. You may have watched, I was taking some notes because it's always good for us to understand what's on the top of your minds, how can we help address it. So I thought overall it was a really great event. Well run.
Sal?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's interesting, and you heard at least once where, well, we never heard of that before. And so if we're not listening and we don't hear things, sometimes students, I think, assume that we know something is a concern of theirs, and we don't always.
I think something alluded to throughout the entire event, and President Olean said it, Mark Thompson said it, and I know, Sal, you said it, the facilities master plan. Could you highlight maybe the biggest points in the facilities master plan, or what students could look forward to as a result of that plan being created?
So the facilities master plan will actually follow the strategic plan. So there isn't one. Well, that's part of the problem. So we will develop one probably over the next 12 months, where we look at the entire university, all three campuses, look at, not only facilities as in buildings and spaces, but, outdoor spaces, walkways, roadways, parkways, like I mentioned earlier. And the goal of it is really to kind of set the framework for when we invest, where we invest. So it might have, we're going to build building A, B, and C to do these three different things, and the first priority is to get building A done.
Mm-hmm. Something talking about facilities being available and kind of reallocating our resources. President Olean talked about increasing in programming and looking at the services we provide. She talked about WQN is closing. Are there any plans, maybe Monique, you know this from a student life perspective, to change that building into something student life related? Or Sal, is there some sort of other plan that's currently in the works for that building?
So no, it's all a relatively new decision. I think there's some sensitivity to, let's wait till that runs its course before we consider that. And the right way to do that is put that as an available space in the facilities master plan, and what makes the most sense to go there, we'll end up going there.
Monique, what are your thoughts on, a potential student opportunity that wasn't really being taken advantage of according to the information provided, closing?
Closing the
WQN, yep.
It goes back to what President Olean said, is again the impetus in the beginning of having that is fostering the learning and the engagement, and when that is waning, and just when you look in general at how our students are engaging and interacting and our community with media, it makes sense to me. I'm always going to advocate for opportunities for students, but I can also say, been here 23 years and look at this, didn't exist. So I'm terribly proud of our student media, where we've come. When I first started, we had a radio station, and now we have television, we have so many different mediums that I think that's great, because we're doing it as students, you're doing it on your own. And so I think you'll continue to push us and challenge us, and so we can invest in the student organizations and what they're doing. So, I think that's always an opportunity for us to continue to do that.
So positively, we saw the traditional question of club sports come up, and we got some really positive feedback on that. It received an enthusiastic yes from President Olean that club sports, do belong on this campus. What progress is being made, maybe from a student opportunity perspective, or the plans for the new York Hill Athletic Center? What's the status on kind of those two things happening?
So the York Hill Athletic Center, that's the track and field facility. That's something that we've looked at and planned in the past. It's really not something that's actively being pursued today. Again, I think that's part of the master planning process, the need for that, whether there is one or isn't one. And that happens regularly through, we do what's called feasibility studies, where we look at the feasibility of building out a space for some need, and feasibility studies don't always turn into actual built projects.
And just specifically in the strategic plan, it outlined a new recreation center and a new health and wellness center.
Right.
Do you have any maybe specific details that you could give us on those two?
No, that is something that we're beginning planning now. We're actually sourcing architectural firms to help us with the planning for that. And that is obviously an important initiative, and so that's one of our top priorities. So even though the master plan will identify everything, there's a few things we're kind of got out in front of it a little too, because we know we want to do them. Not only that facility, but we're also looking at residential life. Judy mentioned that today, where we're starting out with a small look at a few buildings to try to make some immediate impact, and then essentially a residential life master plan, which would be part of the bigger facilities master plan, would look at all the buildings and all the amenities in the buildings and how we can improve res halls to make it a better experience for students.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Monique, as part of your position, you oversee residential life. Something that was mentioned last year, and it wasn't brought up tonight, was that a new residence hall in York Hill was approved. How do you see residential life kind of transforming over the next few years to support the residential and student experience here?
Sure. So I think exactly what Sal said. One thing we know is that our buildings, some of our buildings, can use some attention, and we're working on that together to really take a look at how can we best improve the student experience in the residence halls from a facility standpoint, which we know will attract and satisfy them, and then also from a programming and a curriculum standpoint. And so those are some of the things that we're working on daily to make sure that we're providing the residential experience that our students want. And I think having some updated and some renovations, some different touches with that, and looking at the full strategic plan and working in cooperation with Sal to identify what buildings need some extra touches and what does that look like, that can only enhance it. So I think together we're going to be looking at some really good changes and positive things that will help retain our students. We really want them to stay on campus. I want them. We have some spaces for them to be here. We want them to engage and to be a part of it. And so we're really diligently looking at all the ways in which we can help foster that.
And I think you kind of alluded, you want students to stay on campus. Are there any steps being taken, and as we know in the past town-gown relationships with Hamden, students moving out into the community may be a little bit rocky. Are there any initiatives coming down the line to make sure that those students stay on campus besides, building new buildings?
Sure. I think it's more than just that. It's all of what we just said, is really listening and hearing from students what would make your experience here better. Why do those who choose to stay, why? What can we continue to do to enhance that? And that's what we're currently doing, is really identifying what's out there, what's working, and what's not. What do we need to change? What kind of, whether it's processes, policies, furniture, and that kind of stuff. So we're really actively engaging in all of that, as that's part of the plan and the strategic plan. But most importantly, as Sal said, this is just another large component of that. And I think the health and wellness, I think all of that adds to it. So when we're able to add value with that, and a nice new recreation center that people can have fitness and access to that, that's going to be also attractive, because you're going to want to be here and close to the campus to be able to have access to that. So I think all of that will contribute to a better experience for our residential students. Mm-hmm.
And towards the end of the State of the QUnion, we discovered that the Pine Grove is not protected land, but we do know that the Pine Grove was pretty devastated by the recent tornado that came through campus, as were some other buildings on the campus. Do we have any plans to regrow trees in the Pine Grove or redevelop that space for a different use?
Well, in our previous planning, what we do, when you do a master plan, you identify potential building sites. So the Pine Grove was always a potential building site, but it was one that I think we shied away from because the asset of the Pine Grove was so nice. It really was devastated by the tornado, and it's a shell of its former self. It's really just a couple of pine trees. It's not really a pine grove anymore. And so I think it just becomes a more viable building site, and the connection between the main quad and College of Arts and Sciences, if there were a building there, that would make that flow a little better. So I think it becomes a more viable building site, but we don't have any plan specifically at this time to put a specific building there.
Well, Monique and Sal, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.